And that's great to see them here. Some I know are former teachers from here. Some are just people who, like Tom Moore. Where's Tom?
Right here.
Tom is right here. Tom's, if you know Moore's Garage, that was Tom on the corner. He now lives in Manchester, so he's come back today to see the program, and was saying his sister couldn't make it. I said Tom is recording it, so she'll be able to watch it on Tom's website when she gets the opportunity, and it's up, which is nice to have Tom do this, because other people have said to me,
Right.
oh, I missed the cemetery tour. I said, no, you didn't. Go to www.mcmorrisphoto.com and you can watch it right there. So people are getting the opportunity to see and these programs, even if they can't make the actual show. Now today is sort of a repeat. I say sort of a repeat because it's not going to be identical to the first show, mainly because I'm old and I don't remember what I said. But it'll be basically the same, with maybe a few other things thrown in about the program today. The show is going to consist of first an introduction to one-room schoolhouses. These are photographs that my wife took one day a few years ago. She decided that we have all these one-room schoolhouses around the area, and it would be nice to have photographs of them. So she went around and took photos of the houses. People say, oh, one-room schoolhouses, they're gone. No, they're not gone. They're homes, with an exception of a few. This is a storage place on the way to Shushan. This is at McDougal Lake Road. I'm not quite sure what they're using it for, but it has been fixed up a little bit, and it might be a garage at this point. But a lot of these old schoolhouses have been reworked, so they're serving another purpose, and they make wonderful homes. So these are just some of them. She ran out of window panes, so she doesn't have any more up here. But this gives you a pretty good idea of what we had in the district at that time. The one-room schoolhouse concept, of course, was an early form of education that most of the communities took place and happened not only here, happened in Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, all over the country at that time. When people felt they needed an education. We have to keep in mind, though, that one-room schoolhouses were the result of people feeling, well, we need some education, but there was no curriculum. There was no set length of the year. You could become a teacher at age 18. If you were a woman, you couldn't get married. Well, you could get married, but you couldn't teach. So you had a high turnover of teachers at that time. The weather, the harvesting of crops, the planting of crops, all determined who went to school at what time. Remember, we were an agrarian society, and if you were living off the land, the family was living off the land. So you had everybody in the family was involved in living off the land, and that included all the children on the farm. And if it was time to harvest, you went and harvested. You did not go to school. So you had sort of a sketchy program of education going on, but it was something. It was a start, and it was really important to our communities. The other thing was it was a decentralized organization of schooling. I put out a little map on some of the seats here so you can see. As you look at that map, you can see each place sort of like neighborhood schools, either named for a person who lived there or named for the area in which the school was in, like Perkins Hollow, for example. Those schools were maintained by the people who lived there. They would hire the teacher, and then they would supply the firewood for the winter, and that was about it. As I said, there was no curriculum. So in many instances in the early 1800s, you weren't teaching math, science, reading, writing, anything of that nature. You were teaching how to get along in life. A lot of what was taught in the schools was based on a religious basis, how to be good to your neighbor. Those were the important things, how to be a good mother, how to be a good homemaker. Those are the things that came out of education at that time. Then the men might even be learning somewhat, although I just read in the Vermont history where they tried to include farming classes in school but it failed for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, because remember, we had the Grange, and we had the Farm Bureau, and we had a very strong agrarian society. Even when I came here in '65, we had a very strong agricultural advisory board that would meet here once a month, and they would run evening classes for farmers who wanted to learn more about farming, and it was great. So those things did exist, but yet at that particular period of time, it failed, and perhaps it failed because most of us were so involved, or them were so involved on the farm, getting things done, and not learning in a classroom how to do that, but learning with Dad out in the fields as to how to do it. So the academic part of it just perhaps didn't appeal to the people at that time. After a while, about 1845, 44, 45, New York State decided that maybe we should sort of have a school district. And our first school superintendent was Dr. Asa Fitch, Jr. And he would go around to each of the one-room schoolhouses to visit with the teachers and see how things were going, so on. That's probably the first semblance of an organized education system we had in New York State at that time. Later on, New York State decided it needed a curriculum, a set curriculum for education, which came along, and needed to set a certain number of days each year that a child was supposed to be in school, and also that there would be free education. Now, Salem was ahead of the curve. We had an academy here. For many years, it was a private academy. But in the middle 1850s, the Board of Education decided that the secondary education, high school, what we call today, would be free. A free education for everybody. And that was unusual because that was not the norm across the state. So we had a free education taking place here. You could go to a one-room schoolhouse and without having to pay a cent, because up to that point you had to pay tuition, which meant, obviously, the wealthy could go to school, but the rest of the population perhaps could not because they didn't have the means to do it. But with public education coming about, everybody could go to school. There's some interesting stories about one-room schoolhouses, and I believe it was Homer Dearlove who was the county superintendent, school superintendent, when I came here back in '65. And Homer liked to tell stories, and he remembered the one-room schoolhouses. And there are two stories he loved to tell. The first one was, as he made the rounds throughout the county, he would unannounced, he would try to visit the teachers in the one-room schoolhouses. And he said, there was one teacher, he said, I never got to evaluate her. And we said, well, what happened? He said, every time I would show up, the kids would have their heads on their desk, and she would say, oh, it's nap time. never got to see her teach. And he said, and then there was another teacher I went to see, and it was amazing. Her kids were so smart. I'd go to observe her, and the kids would raise their hands, and they'd have all the answers, and I'd say, boy, this is a terrific teacher. And then she retired, and at her retirement party, I said, Mrs. Brown, I said, you were such a wonderful teacher. He said, your kids always knew the answer. I said, how did you do that? She said, it was easy. She said, I told them if they knew the answer to raise the right hand, if they didn't know the answer to raise the left hand. Anyway, there are a lot of fun stories that do come out of one-room schoolhouses. We tend to romanticize one-room schoolhouses. And there are a lot of good things and good memories that come out of there, but there were also difficult situations. And if you read any of the books out of Vermont or up at the Merck Foundation about one-room schoolhouses and other one-room schoolhouses, you realize that the times were not always happy because you suffered from the weather, you suffered from disease, you suffered from injury. There were just so many things taking place that would interfere with your education. We think education today is so difficult, but it's a dream compared to what they had to do. Remember, your great-great-grandfather said, yeah, we used to walk 4 miles through 4 foot of snow to get to school. Would say, oh yeah, well, sometimes it was that rough. It was difficult to do that. Even in modern times, that could happen. I had a cousin who was a dwarf, and she lived in the city, but the streets were never plowed the way they should be. And she went to a Catholic school, and the nuns were very kind to her. And they would say, "Lena, if the if the snow is a foot high, we don't want you out there. Don't bother to try to come to school." And she wouldn't. But she was a tough customer. She got along in life a heck of a lot better than I think I did, because she had that resilience to do things. I encourage you, when you're driving around, just to look for these schools. I'll give you an idea of where they are. Our school district today, of course, encompasses Salem, part of Greenwich, East Greenwich, part of Hebron, and part of Jackson. This was done in New York State. Somebody came in and made some arbitrary decisions as to what the school bounty lines would be. And interestingly enough, sometimes they were based on for political reasons. For example, in Eagleville, the line down there is a little jagged, and you see one house is in the Salem district and the house next door is in Cambridge. So how can that be? That's because the person who lived in the house in Cambridge didn't want to come to Salem. He said, "We're closer to Cambridge." So the guy drawing the line said, "Okay," went around that house and another house. So you have some oddities like that, but it not only happened here, it happened all around at that time. But the school district as we know it today is the same district that was set many, many years ago. Here are the schools that are within reach. You have Route 30 on the way to Hebron. There's one on South Main Street in Salem. There's one on Academy Street. There's one on Smith Road, Cleveland Road in Jackson, Perry Hill Road, Salem. On State Route 22 going north in East Hebron, which is now the Historical Society building. Camden Valley School at the Shushan Covered Bridge. McDougal Lake School. Tip Lady Road has a school on it. Grimes Hill Road in Hebron. And the Porter School on the way going north. That's the Pembroke Nature Preserve building now. And then there were other schools that are not in these pictures. So how do we get from one-room schools to the academy as we know it today? When centralization came around, each town was approached by the state, and each local one-room schoolhouse district was approached to vote on this law. The state wanted to pass a centralization law, and you either voted to join it or you voted not to join it. In reading the history, I was amazed that probably 99% of the one-room schoolhouse districts and the people who live there voted to become an enlarged, single, centralized school district. Shushan had its own school, a well-established school, grades 1 through 8. I think 1 through 8. And at that time, they decided they wanted to keep their own school, which was fine, which they did. And they kept that school running for many years. The kids who came to the free public high school here in Salem came here on the train at that time. They would get on the train in the morning. They would arrive after school began, because the train, you have to run according to the train schedule. So they would get here for second period, and then they would take the train back home. And they did that until 1934, when the Delaware and Hudson gave up on transporting passengers. In fact, they told the school district, "Look, we're going to run the passenger train till the end of June, and that's it." So the train transportation ended, and at that time, some entrepreneur here, I believe in the village, bought a large van, a bus, if you want to call it that, and he became the transportation for those students who had to come up here to go to high school. The end of the Shushan, well, not the end of the building yet, but the Shushan School directors then decided, when approached by the Salem Board of Education, that they would build a brand new wing in 1955 to accommodate all the students from Shushan. And so they voted on that, and the wing got voted to be built. They closed the school in Shushan, and it became a private concern. But those students then came here in 1955 to the new wing here in Salem. Now, a little ahead of myself here. How did we get to this school in the first place? Education was always very important in Salem. The Williams family were strong advocates of education. The first academy was built by General John Williams here on East Broadway. That academy burned, and when it burned, he put up another one with his own money. When that one burned, wood burns so easily that it's good. At any rate, fire was always a problem. Then they decided that maybe they should build the schools out of brick, which they did. And again, the Williams family donated land. A relative, Thompson, lived down on West Broadway, donated that land for the academy that you see standing there. That academy is not the original building form. The academy over the years was expanded. Some wings were put on and the roof was slightly changed. But that was the original brick building academy. But the Williams family had such great influence in seeing that, education continued and education was important. Now, the last Williams heir married a Congressman Parker, James Parker. And they lived here in the mansion where the school is, and I'll show you slides of that in a minute. Lived in the mansion, and again, very influential, even into the late 1800s, early 1900s. A very influential family in Salem. We don't think about that too often, but when you look at what was accomplished by the Williams family, you realize that the Williamses and the Audubons were so critical in helping to develop education and the arts and things of that nature in our community, that if they hadn't been here, we might not be here today talking about them. Now, Mrs. Parker died and her husband remarried. He was not only a congressman, but he was sort of a gentleman farmer. He raised horses, trotters, had a horse farm here, hired many community people to help run the farm. The other aspect of the Audubons and the Williamses, and not just them, but other well-to-do families in Salem, gave jobs to people in Salem who needed work, whether they be men working on the farm or women working as domestics. In fact, I have a photograph here. I'm going to ask Margaret to talk about it a little bit. Margaret Clayton, you gave me this photo.
Yeah.
And it says, I think Myrtle Johnson in 1939, and this is the last photo that I have ever seen, and I believe she probably was a domestic.
Yeah.
Who worked for the Williamses.
My Aunt Mamie also worked, and they were friends. My Aunt Mamie, my Aunt Maggie were all friends of hers, and that's Mamie Carolyn.
Mamie Carolyn. Okay, and this, it's a great photograph to have because this is probably one of the last pictures of the mansion before it was torn down. I'll hand that around so you can take a closer look at it.
Before 1939.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, this was when the house was still there.
Yeah, it was still there.
And the writing is what my dad wrote about it on the back of the picture, which I enlarged so you can read it.
Okay, and that was Margaret Clayton. The reason I'm mentioning her name is that the other day I discovered a 30-year-old tape of Mary Buffum, a wonderful tape. I knew who Mary was in the tape, I knew who her sister was in the tape, but there was a man's voice in the tape who knew so much about the history, and I have no idea who it was, and it's too bad somebody didn't say, "Hey John, tell us what you know." So I'm going to have to search that one out to find out who that is. So, at any rate, when the last Williams heir passed away, she had spoken with her husband. They both had such a great appreciation for education. And she had spoken with him and asked him to place in his will, the fact that when he passed away, the mansion and the 45 acres would be offered to the school, to the Board of Education, for a price of $8,000. Now, then James passed away, and his wife Ann left Salem, did not live here, so the house was empty for 2 years. But when the will was finally probated, she made sure that the Board of Education knew that this offer was there, and the Board of Education voted to purchase this property for $8,000. Now, in the process, they'd hired an architect out of Cortland, and I put up a blueprint afterward if you get a chance to look at it, but this is known as a demolition blueprint. This was by Carl Clark, Millicent Gilson. They were architects out of Cortland, and once the town had voted to buy the property and to look for money to put the building up, because it took a lot of money to put the building up at that time, they did this drawing showing every structure on the property. So if you're wondering, what was on the property, that draft, that blueprint shows you everything that's there. The mansion, the outbuildings, the water, the little stream that used to run behind the school. Some of you might remember that. It's not there anymore. And hundreds of trees. I was amazed at the number of trees that the Williams families had planted on the property. And that was another thing the Williamses were known for. They loved nature, they loved trees, and they did a lot of planting. Their lawns were always full of flowers, and flower shows were held on the mansion in conjunction with the Audubons who lived across the street. So you had two families that were really interested in nature. The important thing that we have to remember is that even though they were the movers and shakers in our village, from what I've discovered in reading the history is that the entire attitude of our community, even today, has been to be very proud of education and people going to school and doing as best as you can, no matter what your career was going to be. Remember, some of you may remember Harry Carpiak. Remember Harry always had a comment. He said, definition of a farmer is a man outstanding in his field. But I admired Harry because Harry had a great idea as to what our students could do and what they could go into, and he was really an encourager, and it was nice to be able to work with Harry during those years. Okay, I'm going to break off here, and it's going to be a two-part slideshow. The first part deals with showing you the mansion, and we'll go into the dedication of the cornerstone at the school, and then we will shift over to some other films. Tom, you'll be interested in the second part because it shows the fire on the corner before your dad put up his brick garage, and a few other scenes. These were done by E. Gordon Dillon, who was the historian at that time. E. Gordon Dillon used to live in what we call the Bancroft building, or the old TD Bank. That's where he lived. And E. Gordon Dillon, I'm not sure he was a rich person, but he had enough money to buy slide film during the war. And those of us who grew up during the war know you couldn't get film, but he had enough money or enough know-how to get the film. So he took slides, which are great, and that's why we're going to be able to see them today. So we'll go into our first slide program. Okay, this is the Williams Mansion. There's another close-up shot of it. And the piece of paper that I'm sending around with the domestic on it, you can tell, where she was standing when they took the picture of her. Here's a shot in the backyard. Now the mansion actually was renovated a number of times. The first building did not have these wings, but as the Williams says over the generations stayed on, they would add a section here and a section there. Here's the what we call a porte cochere at the rear of the house, which is where you would drive up your horse and buggy or your horse and coach and dismount to go into the house.
Was that brick or wood?
And it's all wood.
All wood.
Yeah. Of course, the house was demolished in 30, I think it was 38. There are a lot of features in the house, I believe, that are still here in Salem, someplace, because the people who were demolishing it were trying to sell whatever they could. A lot of the interior furnishings, again, I think sold at auction or were given away at that time. I used to live in a house on Main Street here in the old village, and the person who sold it to me said the front stairway came from the Williams mansion. I don't know. I have no proof, but all I know is what he told me. And it's a beautiful curved stairway to up to the second floor. Here's a wintry scene. Now, this is not the Williams mansion, of course. Anybody know whose house it is?
Sure.
Yeah. The porch is gone. But this house, in a way, is a Williams house because General John Williams had it built for one of his daughters as a wedding present.
So whose house was it? I didn't hear.
Oh,
Sue Claire's.
it's Sue Clary's
Okay,
house.
that's what I thought.
Yeah. And of course, this is the funeral home, and this is another Williams house, built for another daughter for a wedding present. And there is a third house, and I don't believe I have a slide of that, but around the corner, across the street from the Bancroft Library, is the third house that the general had built for another daughter and a wedding present. This is the back of the funeral house, as we know it today. And this is not the first brick building, because the wings that you see came a few years later. Actually, this building did have a fire in it at one time. It was not a severely damaging fire, but there was a fire in it. But as the enrollment grew, so did the building.
What years was that used?
This probably was around 1880.
And when did they stop using it? It would have been, what, 50?
I'm sorry.
And when did they stop using it?
When did they stop using it? They stopped using that in 1938 was the last use of that building, and then it was private. It was sold to a private party. Dedication of the cornerstone. We refer to this as the 1939 building because that's when the building actually was finished and occupied. But as you can tell from the stone, it's a 1938 stone. And the person standing to the left was the general contractor at that time. If you were to look across the street right now, you would see that stone on the bottom right-hand corner of the original building. Now, some of you might recognize some of these people. In the middle of the photograph is somebody bending over whom some of you knew quite well, and that's Ken Streeter, who at that time was helping to apply the mortar to that stone. This is Caroline Perry. Charlie Perry claims relationship, right?
No, but there is a possibility.
Caroline was the county superintendent at that time, and she is saying a few words at this particular time during this ceremony. Now, it's interesting because, again, when I came to Salem, there was a book put out called the Centralization Book of New York State, 1939. And a lot of it is Caroline Perry. Because when I came here, I came from a school district that was reorganized into one, 3 school districts into one. So I had been through that experience. That's why I ended up here. Some of us lost our jobs because there was no room for 6 or 7 administrators. So in reading the book, I discovered that she did not feel that the towns of Salem and Greenwich and Cambridge should be reorganized into one large school district. So that's the reason why we are today separate schools. And I think she probably made a good decision at that time, because we know how feelings run very high between our three towns. But in looking to the future, she said, I think these school districts are going to be okay. They don't need to be, reorganized into a single school district. I don't know who the young ladies are in the front. Anybody here have any idea? Might be one of you. Okay, there's Ken Streeter. Ken was the principal at the academy, and then came over to the new building to continue on as principal. But you get an idea of the kind of construction at that time. It looks like the foundations have been poured, and now they're putting up some steel around the building for the walls to get going. Unique thing about this building, just ask any student who's been to the school here, is the basement. Because I think more than one student has managed to get down there and to wander through. It's a full basement in the school, and for many years was designated as a civil defense shelter in the basement, where we had a whole lot of civil defense stuff, which by now I think probably has been thrown out. But it was an amazing feat to have a school that big with a full-size basement. Okay, on the left is Robert N. Wilson, who was at that time president of the Board of Education. The minister in this middle, I'm not sure who that is at this point, but I know that's Bob Wilson on the left. He was also, I think, the president of one of the banks in town. Okay, here's a longer shot. Again, showing the crowd and construction in the background. Now, I just read this. I just read an article I discovered in the archives, written by the construction manager, who actually wrote the article. And he was talking about the demolition. And he said, well, we're not going to demo. There are two buildings we're not going to demo. He said, one is the brick building, this one, and a barn. Again, in '65, this was still standing. I don't remember the barn. Charlie, do you remember? Was there a barn out there?
Yeah.
In '65? I just don't remember it. But the guy was pointing out, he said, we're not taking it down because it's being used as an elementary classroom at that time. They didn't have room in the old academy.
Where was that located on the property?
It was right on Warren Street.
Oh,
You know where the circle is? Out, it was right in that area.
oh,
Yeah, there was a basketball court there, as well as the barn. Used for a lot of things. We used it in the rec program also during the summer.
Yeah, and just go back. They took that down when they put up the, I think it was 1984 high school wing. I believe that's when that came down.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another shot. The guy in the pith helmet, I believe, is Delbert Abbott. Delbert lived right on the corner here of Warren Street and East Broadway. And he was, I think he was the pharmacist of Salem at that time. And I'm not quite sure who. I suspect this might be members of the Board of Education, but I'm not quite sure. And again, more construction, giving you an idea of what was happening. Oh, that's my mistake. I apologize. I pulled that slide the other day and I put it in upside down. Quickly, it's just a shot of we're inside now. The building is done. These are interior shots. That's the library upstairs. In there, let's see if I have a correct shot. Okay, here we go. When this building, well, it was in 1984, Carl Clark was still alive, and he came to address the board, and he visited with me, and we were outside walking around the building, and his comment was, as he looked at that original building, he said, that was my capital ship. He said, that is the best building that I have ever, school building I have ever put up. And when you walk around, you walked around when he pointed out details, like the Flemish brickwork, which is the strongest kind of brickwork you can put up in a building. The dental work, if you look up at the roof line, you'll see the dental work up there. The scrolls on both ends of that building, the ornate scrolls on both ends of the building. The windows that were put in. On the interior, nothing was spared as far as money goes, only quality goods. One of the things that was happening at that time is we were just getting out of the Depression, and President Roosevelt had enacted some programs to create jobs for communities, for people in communities. And one of them was the Works Progress Administration Project. And the Work Progress Administration Project would help pay for school buildings. There were many, many school buildings built across the United States utilizing money from that project. When it came time to vote on the school building, there was a question as to whether our community could afford it. But the Work Progress Administration came along and said, look, we'll give you $400,000, give or take a few, toward this building. And so the people voted for it. So we have what I call an excellent, artistic, well done, good quality school. When principal friends of mine would come to Salem to visit the school, they would say, how did you do this? This is the most beautiful school I have ever been in my life. And they at that time, it was. And I think it still is. But you can tell just from looking at the picture, the woodwork, the scroll work, the tile floors. By the way, all the furniture is quality furniture. There was not a piece of furniture that was cheap that was brought to this building. Typical classroom. Wooden desks are all gone. They were sold off years ago. We now have plastic desks in there, and the blackboards have been replaced by modern digital whiteboard, things of that sort in the classroom. The old speakers, they're all gone. The clock you see on the wall, those were all sold. In fact, I bought a number of them and converted them to battery. Every one of my kids has a clock from Salem, Washington Academy in their house as a reminder.
Isn't that the phone on the wall too?
Yeah, an old phone on the wall, which used to work sometimes. Hard to see, but is the stained glass window, which is unique to our building, because I've never been in any other school where they've had stained glass. But again, Works Progress Administration putting together an artist. The glassmaker himself was not from here, but I believe the artist was connected. In each room, the subject of each room was depicted in the stained glass window. For example, to go into the cafeteria, there is a woman handing out a piece of pie. If you come to my house, you'll see that stained glass window in my front door. Now, how did that happen? Again, they were having an auction. They were putting things up for sale and they were selling the doors off. And I have to admit, I got a little annoyed and complained. I said, that's not right. This is part of the school history. Those things should stay here. And I was told, well, we've advertised it. We have to put at least one up. I said, okay. I couldn't go, but my wife Sarah Jane went and she bought the door and the window. And we had the window had some damage and we had it repaired and we had it rehung on our front door. So at least it's in the area. The others are sitting in a closet someplace in the school building. Okay, here's the original gym. At the time of this was the ultimate state-of-the-art gymnasium auditorium with a stage. The old wooden chairs are now gone, but I'm sure those of you who went to Salem remember those ugly, creaky, uncomfortable chairs. This used to be at one time, this was the best basketball court around, back in '39. And it was that, we used this for a number of years until we put up the new high school wing and the new basketball court.
We replaced the backboard there about 1960 or 61, put in the glass backboards.
Right. Right, now I was at Hartford yesterday in their old gym auditorium, pretty much the same idea, same scale.
Where did those chairs go,
They sold them. Just another shot. Now this was always called the Board of Education room. Again, ornate woodwork, paneling, fireplace, mantle, good furniture in the room. It had a blackboard in it. In fact, one of my kids had it. I think it was 4th grade. Mrs. McGuire, not Salem McGuire, but the one from Vermont, taught in this classroom for a couple of years before we moved her out into a more appreciable spot. I remember, I think it was Superintendent Flint who came to me one day and said, I don't know what I'm going to do about that classroom next door. He said, they're so noisy. Well, she had the kids building things with hammers and nails. And of course the noise traveled into his office. Said, well, at least they're busy.
Al, I had 1st grade in that room while they were building a new wing with Mrs. Warner. 55, I was the 1st, 2nd grade class in the new wing. So that's how we ended up in that. We thought we were smart because we had our own fireplace to decorate for Christmas time.
Okay. Now here's an exterior view of the original building. Again, I mentioned the exterior architecture. All the chimneys are a dummy. Basically, they have ventilation primarily. The columned front is certainly New England colonial style. The windows, same thing. But a beautiful schoolyard. It's another thing people would say to me. Where did all these trees come from? How come this campus has so many trees? Well, they were there. And the architect from the Board of Education, had enough sense to realize that they just impacted the campus and added to the beauty of the whole campus.
Now, the original house set out closer to the road, right?
Yes. Yeah. Now here's a fall scene from another angle. Oh, I have to tell you a little story. See the flagpole? I forget what year it was. It was in the 60s. Flagpole was in really tatty shape, needed painting, and one day a woman showed up with a man, and Flint and I were talking with them, and they said, yeah, we're flagpole painters. And I said, oh, that's good, okay, you're going to paint the flagpole. Yep. And lo and behold, he didn't put on the gear. She put on the gear. She climbed up the flagpole, painted it, came back down, and I said, "Wow." I said, "You're amazing." She said, "Well, yeah." She said, I was on a TV program called What's My Line?" Remember that? They couldn't guess what I did. Another shot. Went backwards, okay. In the winter.
So Al, all those chimneys were just decorative?
Yeah, the ventilation. The main chimney you can't see. If you look hard to the left of the photo, you'll see a little chimney sticking up with some smoke. Okay, that was what I would call the heating chimney to the boiler room. But they also used to burn, I shouldn't say this, that's where they used to burn all the trash also.
I remember those days.
Yeah, you know when they were burning the trash. Because
So those rooms with the fireplaces, those are just decorative?
yeah, right, they were just decoration. Unless you wanted to put an electric log in. You notice they had a plug, it had an outlet in it. E. Gordon Dillon, he was a good photographer and he took some nice shots. This, of course, a beautiful winter shot. Now we work our way down the street a little bit to the brick church, and as I mentioned earlier, the chapel on the left was used as a classroom for a while. One of my children went there. Just another shot of the tower. Interesting story about the clocks. In a way, this was considered to be the town clock. And you can't tell from looking at it from East Broadway, but there are only 3 faces in the tower. And the story is, they solicited money from around the village to do this clock. But the people on the north side of town, known as Irish Town, refused to pay. So they didn't get any face. And the pillars of the church. If you know anybody who wants to buy a theater, it's for sale. But this photo shows actually the deck is in pretty good shape, as are the pillars. Today the deck is in pretty much disarray. Anybody know what this is? This is the Episcopal Church interior. E. Gordon Dillon was an Episcopalian, so he took that photo, and obviously it's Christmas time. Just some long shots from actually the backyard of my house on Main Street, just showing the Presbyterian Church, the White Church, in the winter. Again, other shots, we'll just flip through these. A wide angle shot. This is from Woody Hill. I think basically this is called Rye Hill, looking down into the village at that time. And this is a water wheel. Bob Thompson, I asked Bob Thompson about this, and he said there used to be a flax mill out in the back of his house which used the water from Beaver Creek to drive the water wheel for power to run the flax mill. So that's what we're looking at. As far as I know, all that stuff has disappeared. I don't think it's any place around.
Is that just before it goes into White Creek?
Yeah, before it goes into White Creek. Anybody know what that is? Tygasons? Tygasons, right. Turkey farm up at Tygasons. Okay, Tom. If any of you remember Moore's Garage on the corner, which eventually was built into a brick structure, This was 1944, an unfortunate fire. And I'll run through these slides. These are the only pictures that I know that exist of this very important corner within the village. Tom, jump right in whenever you think you want to. This is a side, on the side street, a little hard to tell from this picture. Here we are. East Broadway. Now, there used to be a tavern?
Yes, Bob Evans.
Okay, the Bob Evans Tavern. I recognize that name now because Vernon Shue always talked about the Bob Evans Tavern because I think he lived there. Again, as you look at the photos, and as I look at them, I wonder how they saved anything. I mean, you have like two weak streams of water. Just didn't have the equipment in those days to really fight a big fire. I think they were lucky it didn't spread to other buildings.
There was a showroom for cars on the other side there with Beverly Alzheimer's.
Yeah, question has come up, the cars look all so old, and I said, well, they are, because when World War I broke out in 1941, Detroit stopped making cars, they started making tanks. So all the cars you see are going to be, 5, 6, 8, 10 years old. Okay, we're winding. That looks like they've got it pretty much under control here. And there it is, boarded up. The other Williams house, the third Williams house that I mentioned is on the right side. That's the one with the Greek Revival columns in front of it. That was a Proudfit house. Okay, that's our first carousel.